Good afternoon. I wonder if I can interrupt you just a second to welcome you here. This is a great day to be a Husky. We are, and not just because the coach has promised us to do next weekend what he did this weekend, but even more exciting things going on. I mean, this university was described in a recent New York Times article as a research colossus. And when I think about what we're gathered here today to celebrate, it puts a real exclamation point behind that. The Molecular Engineering and Sciences building is a remarkable building, not only because it is aesthetically beautiful and because it has labs where all our pointy-headed guys can do great stuff, but also because it has a particular focus on interdisciplinary work. One of the requirements of that building is that it sort of crosses disciplines. So we have not only engineers, but we have scientists. And the exciting thing I think about that is, as I think about the significance of molecular engineering in particular, it seems to me, as I suspect we're going to hear this afternoon after lunch, as likely to be significant as the digital revolution was in the computer and high-tech space. Molecular engineering has a capacity to deal with everything from nanotechnology to drug delivery, to the creation and growing of new organs, to everything in between. And we are very much at the cutting edge of that. And this building really allows us to gather the teams and put them together in a way that will ensure they have the space to do the remarkable work they're capable of doing. So we really are delighted to have you here today as we celebrate the opening of that building. I think you've probably already had a pretty full plate of interesting discussions about this. We're going to hear some exciting things right after lunch about the way in which this affects not only research but also teaching, but also I think what the larger range vision and implications are for this kind of work. Work that we are committed with our partners that are here in this room today to be not only the leading university, but to be the leading place in the United States where this is done. We have so many of our great corporations that are represented here that do this kind of work. The partnership that we enjoy with you is one of the real keys that allows us to excel in the way that the university can and does. I want to congratulate the leadership of the College of Engineering and Sciences as well. Our great dean has made this possible by his relentless lobbying and the pictures that he had of both Mark Emmert and Phyllis that allowed this building to get moved very much to the top of the list. An important building. The case that was made and the way in which it was designed, I think, are really, truly transformative for this university. So delighted to have you here today. Look forward to the panel discussion after and appreciate your support and all that you do to help this university remain the great university it is. Thank you.
I'm Matt O'Donnell. I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering. I wanted to thank Mike Young, our president, for welcoming us today. Had some great talks this morning. We'll have more this afternoon where the theme changes to biotech. What we're going to try to do here at this, after I introduce our panel, is to focus on the impact of molecular engineering and sciences. Not what it is, but what it will do. So before we start that, I'm going to define molecular engineering and sciences because everybody says they don't know what it is, they don't have a definition of it. I think it's really pretty easy, okay? And that is the design, creation, designing new functional molecules, which is really chemistry, sort of the science side of it. And then the integration of those molecules into design systems specific to an application. That's the engineering part of it. So I think it's better. Is that okay? Okay. David says it's okay, so I'm okay with it. And David Ginger stopped eating for at least 3 seconds, so I think we're okay with that. It's chocolate, he says. Okay. So let me introduce our panel, and then we'll get into what do we think is going to be the impact of the types of stuff that we heard about this morning and we'll hear about this afternoon in biotech, that is molecularly engineered systems for society. So first, my order is not the order here. So let's see if I can do this. So my order is Suzie. So Suzie Pun. Hi, Suzie. Everybody from UW knows Suzie. She's the Rushmer Associate Professor in Bioengineering, Molecular Delivery Systems. One thing that's been one of the grand challenges in biotech is blood-brain barrier. I always have a hard time saying that. So hopefully we'll get a little bit into that. Hugh Hillhouse holds the Rehnberg Chair in Chemical Engineering. You saw his picture up on a couple of the presentations this morning. Working to improve and simplify and commercialize the manufacture of solar cells. He had some UW roots, so we're very happy to get him back about a year and a half ago, is it now? How long is it? Almost 2 years now. Okay, great. So it's great to have you. Mark Verbrugge, who you heard this morning give a talk. He is Director of Chemical Sciences and Material Systems Lab at General Motors Research and Development Center. He was commiserating, G-Way, about having lost you. I was saying how happy I am that he came. So he's been a conduit of one of our new faculty members to the College of Engineering. I think you heard a lot in his talk today about the impact of the kind of molecular systems he works on in the automotive industry, and specifically with the battery systems. And Mark is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Rick Luebbe. Okay, so we know him around here because he's been very helpful in getting one of our technologies commercialized, which is in Energy 2. He's the CEO of Energy 2. He began his career, I didn't know this, by the way, it's on here, so it must be true, which is he began his career as an Army aviation officer. I didn't know that. But he has a biology degree in the background from Cornell. Eric Dobmeier. We just met today, so it's amazing why our paths have not crossed, but he's the Chief Operating Officer at Seattle Genetics. So you manage everything that goes on. They says all the things that you manage here, but you manage everything that goes on because you're the Chief Operating Officer.
Except the science.
Except the science, but that's not why we're here, right? It's to talk about the impact. So I'm going to start it off, and Suzie, I told you I was going to ask you the first question, so I will, and I'll make it a softball, and we'll get harder from there. But we're going to hear more this afternoon about molecular, engineering. But you have been one of the key people in molecular engineered systems for biotechnology applications, drug delivery, other things. Where do you think it's going to go? Do you see any limitations on where it's going, and what do you think is going to be a big home run associated with one of these molecular engineered systems for drug delivery?
That was not the softball question you promised me.
So I lied.
Okay. So our work is in the drug delivery area. So that's the area that I'm most familiar with. And I think there's a lot of potential in that area. So one of the works that excites me a lot is actually from David Baker, who's right here. If you look out on the market, there have been several drugs that have been very successful that have come about because scientists have been able to design drugs molecularly. And they've been designing these small molecules based on how they interact with proteins. And I think David's lab is taking that to another level because they're taking large molecules and doing molecular design on larger molecules. So I think that's really promising and may lead to completely new drugs.
Right.
Yeah.
Eric, let me follow up on that because a party that will remain nameless over a dinner, we were talking about molecular engineered delivery systems. And he went on to this passionate speech over a couple glasses of wine, which was about we should go back and get the greatest hits of the 1980s in drugs. So small molecule drugs which failed because of secondary mechanisms, competing mechanisms for that with the modern engineered delivery systems, we can go back and revisit some of those small molecule drugs. Was that wine-induced hubris, or do you think this is something that could be real?
I think it could be real. At Seattle Genetics, what we focus on are antibody-drug conjugates. So we're working with large molecules and small molecules in the same chemical, in the same drug. And what we do is we take antibodies that find cell surface receptors that are found on tumor cells and not so much on normal tissue. And then we attach drugs to those antibodies. When the antibodies internalize into the target cell, linker is cleaved by enzymes inside the cell and releases the drug. So the idea is we're delivering the drug directly to the tumor cell, so increasing the efficacy and reducing the toxicity. So I do think there are a number of different kinds of drugs that maybe if you injected them through an IV into a patient might be too toxic or not have a therapeutic window that you can revisit by delivering them in a different way, like we are.
So let me ask one question, and I want to switch to clean tech for a minute. So what's limiting us from that?
I'm sorry,
What's limiting us from doing that right now? Because in cartoon fashion, it makes a lot of sense. Antibody to receptor, drug goes in. So what's limiting us?
So there's been a lot of challenges along the way. I mean, antibodies have developed, we started with murine, mouse antibodies, and we had to learn how to make them non-immunogenic. We had to find the right targets. We had to learn how to manufacture and test them. So the large molecule piece has progressed a lot. And then we had to find linkers that were stable in the bloodstream, but could be cleaved inside tumor cells. So there's a lot of technology development that's taken a few decades to come along. Our first drug was approved about a year ago for lymphoma. And it's called Etcetris. It's a great drug for 2 types of lymphoma, and we're continuing to work on it in other areas as well. And there's a drug from Genentech Roche called TDM1. It's an empowered version of Herceptin that'll likely be approved next year. So I think we're right on the cusp of a lot of these drugs getting approved.
Does that sound like somebody looking for some investment? Sounds perfect. So let's do a little on the clean tech. By the way, please interrupt with questions anytime during this whole thing. We have Candace in the back with one microphone. Is that it? We got 2 microphones, and therefore 2 people. Okay, so they will. So just raise your hand or otherwise get their attention. So Hugh, this morning heard talks about organic semiconductors, non-organic semiconductors, different characteristics between them with the excitons. So we got the technical details. Why should we care? Should we, as users and all that, should we care whether organics win or inorganics win?
Well, let me answer that by saying whether we should or shouldn't care, people don't. What they want is power at a price. And so I think the burden is on the research community to come up with ways that we can address that. One of the things that I see is a big difference between, and I'll get to the organic versus inorganic, but taking a step back and saying from molecular engineering and looking at both biotech and clean tech, I think there's one thing that is an important spectrum that we need to recognize as a difference, and it really is a factor of scale and profit margin. If we think about on the one limiting side of the spectrum and some of the pharma things, these are things that you can make a relatively small volume of something and a company can expect very high profit margins. If you look on the clean tech side of things, and we want to look at technologies that we can deploy to large scale harvest or store energy, these are things that will have to be done at extremely large scale. And people will have to live on low profit margins because they're competing with things like coal or other things. So that sets so when we look at the difference between organic and inorganic, a lot of it has to do with, one of the things that Christine mentioned was about the energy payback time. And we also have to think about what kind of capital cost takes to build a plant. Typical solar plant today might take 300 to 500 million capital costs to get going. And if you think about how hard it is to borrow that today, that's a significant challenge. So some of these solution processing things, whether it's organic solar cells or inorganic, getting that capital expenditure, down is very important, and that's some of the things that.
Okay, so I want to follow on that with Rick, but first, though, you said something. So is it really sort of the overall process cost and flexibility and ease rather than whether it's 11% or 13% efficiency that you think is going to kind of dominate where we wind up?
So again, what the market shows is people don't care. What they care is the price of the power, and you can do that at low efficiency, as long as it's really low cost, or higher efficiency. But what we're seeing is people have a premium. They will pay a premium for higher efficiency because they only have, say, a fixed amount of roof area, and so these things matter.
Okay. So, Rick, that's what I wanted to follow on, because one of the things that I have just noticed and as this institute has come together and talking to the 2 major species that are out there is that the model we have on the bio side is sort of a traditional investment model of, you come in with proof of concept, you go to an A round of investment, which may be a few $1 million, and depending whether it's small molecules or biologics, there's different scale factors. But there's timing and scaling, which fit pretty well into the investment world that we've had in this country for a couple of decades. Okay, what Hugh said is just one of the issues I think we've had with clean tech has been you go in, you get an investment, you scale up, and all of a sudden you have to do a $500 million pilot or a demonstration to show that something can scale. How do you do that? How do you work as a business and still work in that kind of environment?
It is a very difficult model, particularly relative to what venture capitalists prefer, which is social media, something they can flip in 18 months. Now, I personally believe that the social benefits to clean technology is perhaps more significant than social media. You can debate that, I guess. But so it does take a different approach. It takes a different philosophical approach to the investments. So you have to find investors that are more patient and willing to invest in the long term. Now, that being said, it does require help. It is not as straightforward as putting a couple $1 million into a software startup and crank out something you can sell immediately. Because there are so many iterations required and so much testing required by end users, et cetera, it takes a lot longer and takes a lot more investment, a lot more support. So that is where it's really the perfect opportunity for public-private partnerships.
Yeah, and so I'm going to come back to that, because about the public-private partnerships, what that means versus the research industrial partnerships, which are typical, I think, more on the biotech side. Mark, I want to go to you. And I got to start with the story. I didn't tell you the story, but 1979, I interviewed at the GE labs and then wound up going there after grad school for 10 years. And when I walked up the front road to GE, to the lab, there was a car there. It was a General Motors car, all-electric General Motors car, 1979. That was a joint project between GE and General Motors at the time. And of course, there was this thing, that was a car this size with a hood that was up like this, had gazillions of batteries, and it was a DARPA, I think, funded demonstration project. Why is it taking so long? And are the next level of changes beyond where we are right now going to take as long as that?
Well, good question. I wish I had the immediate answer. You can go back to the 1960s and see the first fuel cell electric vehicle.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid, my 1968 Scientific American had a picture of the GM Electrovan, which had compressed hydrogen, compressed oxygen on board. And you actually had more emitted water dripping after the vehicle because the cryogenic oxygen system had a lot of ice forming on it, rather than the water emitted from the fuel cell. I guess another anecdote along these lines is when I interviewed with GM in 1983. I graduated from graduate school in 1985, but in 83 I interviewed. I drove a little electric vehicle. It might have been one similar to what you're talking about because of the time frame. And we got halfway along on the drive during my interview, and the car conked out. And so we had to walk back, and it was May, and I had my first wool suit from wearing at that time, and it was extremely hot. And I said, this company can use me. But at any rate, short answer is, right now you're seeing I think flourishing of vehicle electrification. I do believe, I was chief engineer for our EV1 program, and I put my soul into that vehicle. But I also learned a big lesson. Batteries are a use it or lose it commodity. What I mean by that is don't sell somebody a battery. This is my philosophy. It's what GM has used in our electrification efforts. Don't sell somebody a battery because they're very expensive unless they're going to use that battery all the time. The problem with an electric vehicle is if you give somebody, for example, what we want today out of our vehicle, say 200 miles of range, you can do that. A 50 kilowatt hour battery and the energy consumption on vehicles today, you can provide 200 miles. It's extremely expensive. And they're only going to drive it typically about 20 to 30 miles a day. 80% of all drives in the United States, a full drive during the whole day, are less than 40 miles. So what we did with the Volt was to make a much smaller battery that provided that 40 miles of range, and then let people, if they wanted to go more than that, do it in internal combustion engines. And our emissions between cities at highway driving are almost negligible. In fact, if you drive in some places where the emissions are quite bad, say the LA Basin, you will actually be cleaning up the air as you drive the vehicle, with the exception of CO2 emission. CO2 has now become, obviously more of interest, but unwanted emissions, previously regulated emissions, you can actually remove in a vehicle system. So
Oh,
So
sorry,
I think,
go ahead.
I think we are there now. It's just that I don't see the ultimate solution necessarily as being a pure electric vehicle. I think you can't compete with liquid fuels for kilowatt hours per kilogram. And so I think the big question comes back to sort of biology. Will we get cellulosic ethanol or cellulosic-derived fuels? That's, to me, the real big question out there right now. So now you have non-renewable fuels, and you couple that with something like an extended-range electric vehicle.
So where do you think it can get to the point where the battery is inconsequential? That is that you've had this argument that a hybrid is going to be make sense in terms of the way we actually use our cars. But that's a reasonable argument. But do you think we'll ever get to the point where the battery is just not the driver on either a hybrid system or a full electric system?
If you went to a full battery electric vehicle, you might look at some of the advanced concepts out there like lithium silicon versus lithium sulfur, the two opposing electrodes. And these might bode well because silicon is thought to be cheap in volume and sulfur is thought to be cheap in volume. So you might overcome the cost problem. And I think eventually we will because we're seeing trajectories of costs coming down. You still have the problem of charging. So even if you were to be able to make a battery that could charge at rates comparable to how fast you put energy into your gas tank today, the charger would have to be about 200 kilowatts, and no electric utility could do that. You'd have to revamp your whole electrical utility architecture. So I think charging times is sort of the next big rock in the road after we get rid of the costs that really haven't been looked at yet.
Okay. So yes, can you get a microphone up here, please?
With respect to the footprint, the ecological footprint that electric vehicles have from the beginning, from the ground up, having to build the plants, to build the batteries, to go through the whole evolution in technology, compared to our old system, where we know we have the plants to build the gasoline-powered automobiles now. How do those two footprints compare? I remember back when they first became more or less popular, that there was some rumors heard maybe on the internet, so it must have been true, that you could compare the footprint to a Hummer against a relatively, not comparably sized, but average size electric car, and that the electric car actually over its lifetime, which was kind of ambiguous, made a much larger ecological footprint than a Hummer did. Burning fuel, having to build it, having to dispose of it, what kind of emissions it produced was less of an impact than an electric car. Is that anywhere close to being the truth?
It's certainly a concern. We do what we call a well-to-wheels analysis. So you're digging stuff out of the ground, and that's sort of where you start, your ores or what have you, and then all the way to the wheels and the user application. I would say that when those concerns surfaced early on, it typically was with battery technologies. Lead acid was pretty much all you had, and then there was nickel zinc and nickel cadmium, and none of those did well in a well-to-wheels analysis. Nickel metal hydride started looking a whole lot better, especially because the nickel metal hydride battery is fully recyclable. It goes into the steel industry, the disposal of those batteries. And lithium ion is also something that does very well in a well-to-wheels analysis. So I don't think those concerns will be as big a deal. We work with various, you mentioned public-private partnerships. We work with various national labs in particular to do well-to-wheels analyses and make sure they're transparent, and so everybody can look at them and investigate them. Fuel cells look very good in this regard. They're probably the best. Absent right now hydrogen infrastructure and some other cost issues on a vehicle. Lithium-ion batteries, particularly hybrid electric vehicles, look very good on a well-to-wheels analysis. Turns out natural gas vehicles look very good on a well-to-wheels analysis. The last point I'd make is that I think this EREV vision, extended range electric vehicle like a Volt, is a very good one, especially if we could bring in our renewable fuels. But if we use coal for our electricity generation, the arguments don't look so good. And that goes to the point of, again, well-to-wheels.
Pat?
So I guess I have a similar sort of question. I get so excited from all these talks this morning and what's possible, and I have a lot of faith in the people that I know of making breakthroughs that change the linear curve to a leap above that. But there's kind of a gnawing question about the molecules and the materials themselves, being petroleum-based, the chemical industry part of all of this, like, you scale it to natural gas. But ultimately, this is going away sooner than later, and, instead of cling wrap, we're just not going to have those materials at some point because it's all related to the general availability of carbon compounds. What are we going to do about that problem? I mean, we might come through it with great advances, but ultimately they seem to still be based on petroleum and carbon. Renewable isn't so clear to me. Maybe they would have some comment on that.
The entire chemicals industry is undergoing a huge change to develop alternative feedstocks, and I think we'll probably hear a little bit about some of that later this afternoon. Every chemical company out there has significant research efforts to try to get away from, these petrochemical things, paraxylene that's used as the feedstock that goes into PET, all of our soft drink bottles. Virtually every, and whatever the starting point for cling wrap is. But I think that's something that is on everybody's radar, and there's a lot of efforts to change it.
You one slide about the polymer, and you can think of the polymer in sort of an old-fashioned kind of, that's a molecularly engineered system to me, in that you were trying to planarize these things. That's exactly the type of stuff I think that Hugh is talking about, is that molecular engineering goes into changing feedstock, right? Is the potential for changing feedstock.
The monomers really do come from, carbon compounds that are ultimately based on non-renewable sources.
I think the answer is, and what we all want to see, and there's a lot of research going on in this area, and I think it's going to happen in our lifetimes, is in the case of automotive, where we use most of the petroleum, is renewable feedstocks, so cellulosic. And there are a lot of advancements there. I'll just name one. Ionic liquids are doing well as far as breaking down lignin and other aspects of switchgrass and other materials. And there are, I think it's 6 plants now going in that are fairly large. There's a controversy around corn-derived ethanol, but it turns out without the subsidies, there's more ethanol being sold for transportation than ever before. People said that whole market was going to fall apart, and it's done anything but. So there's a large push, I think, even in the marketplace for renewable fuels. I think it's going to come, but that's, and then, where's your energy coming from? It's coming from the sun, basically.
There's, I think, a really great sort of big picture that fellow Jeff Sorolla, sort of, at least that's who I heard this from first, where he talks about the average oxidation state of carbon. And if you look at it in methane, it's -4, and CO2, it's +4. And you can take virtually every carbon source out there and plot it on that scale. What we do today is we dig things out of the ground at -4, -2, and then, take it up to +4, and then we're done with our carbon. Well, what says we have to do is we take things like renewable, natural resources, sustainably grown biomass, and take and inject solar energy into that to bring the oxidation state of carbon down. Then we use it, and we basically recycle our carbon. I think that's where we have to go, but you have to have, a clean energy source to be moving that oxidation state back negative. And that's a huge challenge, but I think that's a big picture. And we have to think about our energy source and our carbon source as separate things.
Okay, so the Energy Guys had the benefit of giving the talks this morning, so everybody's got that in the forebrain, and we haven't with the bio folks this afternoon. So remember your questions, so late in the afternoon you can ask them as well. But one theme I want to change, which I think is common for both of these, is this is clearly, the development of new molecules and new molecular systems is going to have huge impact on stuff, right? The stuff that we make, the stuff that we use. Player. The United States is a player versus the rest of the world as players. Let's start first on the biotech. Clearly, U.S. has lead in molecular engineered delivery system and all that. Where are we? Where's the rest of the world? Where do we think it's going to go? And what should we be doing? And who should we be partnering with? And who should we be competing with?
So in biotechnology, a big portion of the innovation comes from the United States, and I think it's a factor of a lot of things. Great science here, you know, the good relationships between industry and academia, but also just access to capital. Biotech is a very capital-intensive business, and it takes a long time to develop drugs, so you need to be well-funded for long periods of time. I think outside of the US, a lot of the innovation comes from big pharma companies rather than biotechs. There's a lot of Swiss or French or England-based companies, and there's a lot going on in the developing world in China and India as well. They're not quite there yet, but they're really progressing quickly, especially in the generics area. So I think that, you know, in the US, our lead in innovation is really based on the science and the capital to form lots of companies, bring them along, you know, and one of the challenges lately has been the IPO market has not been very robust. And for biotech, traditionally, to really get to the point where you can do major clinical trials and launch a drug, you either need to be public or you often end up getting acquired by a larger company. So that's one of the challenges we're facing now is what's the right business model? The fully integrated biopharmaceutical company model, which is the model Seattle Genetics has taken, is a tough model to do now unless you can access the public markets, and that's becoming more challenging.
Yeah, so what happens if your ability, you know, 5 years from now, you have half the ability to access those markets? Is, you know, there's other places which could invest. Do you go after them, or how do you partner with? That's what I'm trying to get to, is how are we going to partner with the rest of the world in these areas?
There's a lot of newer business models which venture capitalists are trying out, which, you know, sort of special purpose entities. You fund one molecule or one class of molecules, you don't fund a whole company. And you play out your hand there, and if it works out, great, you've got something. If it doesn't work out, you shut the company down and move on to the next thing. The other thing is you see a lot of companies that are built to get to a certain stage, phase 2 data, and then they either partner the molecule and move on to the next thing, or they sell the company at that point. I don't think there's a big disconnect between what's going on in the US and what's going on in other parts of the world, aside from it's really unclear to me personally what's going to happen in, particularly India and China. The, you know, the legal and regulatory systems are evolving quickly there, but there's still, you know, there's a lot of manufacturing happening, but not as much discovery. But that's going to change very dramatically in the next decade, and I'm not sure how that's all going to play out.
Well, let me just make a comment on that, and then I want to go on. But any of you people who have been involved in the electronics industry and who have been going to Taiwan for a long time, is you look at the Taiwan of the 1980s and you would say exactly that, right? They're mostly into manufacturing. If you go to Taiwan now, they're innovators, and their innovation index in these areas is comparable to ours. So, you know, I think it's just time scale, right, before that's going to start to happen.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. Suzie, I want to come back to you, but I want to get to the clean tech guys on this point, is sort of the international competition and the way it's structured, the way we do business here is structured versus elsewhere. Does it make it better? And so, Rick, why don't you give a shot at that?
Sure. So my perspective is energy storage, so batteries and capacitors, certain types of capacitors. My sense is right now that really I think Korea is probably best positioned to get a dominating place in from a production technology perspective in batteries and capacitors. And I haven't really studied it in detail, but the sense I get is there's better integration there between where the research is being developed and how they commercialize those technologies. And I also think that in general, Korean companies are more aggressive about investing in technologies in the long term. So Samsung, for example, is willing to take a loss for 10 years if they can guarantee market dominance at the end of those 10 years, where the mindset with US corporations seems to be much shorter term, and it doesn't really allow them to invest in those technologies that really take a long time to create a dominant market position.
Yeah. What about Chinese technology and development for solar?
Good, important question. Hard to know. You know, one of the things is since the capital investments for building a large solar manufacturing facility are so high, how things are financed is important. And this is something that is a big difference between overseas and in the US. You know, it might be pretty easy for a Chinese company to get $1 billion to build something out. And that's virtually impossible here in the US, you know, unless you've got that in the bank. And there's only very few companies that may even have that. So, but one of the things that's at play in the PV market is the actual cost of solar cells has come down so much that actually shipping and transport is becoming a non-trivial component of it. And so this is actually one of the things that's starting to shift the tide back.
Investment in this company in the southern part of Washington, I heard about that solar cell.
There's actually a lot of now even Chinese companies that are setting up facilities in the U.S. I don't know what part of that is due to shipping and what part is it to try to smooth over trade war things, but...
Okay. And so a public, we've heard again this public-private partnership. So you're in a big company, all right? So will you just do it yourself? If you want to go to the next stage in energy storage, for example, are you just going to do it yourself, or are you going to be... Right, and so how do you structure that from your point of view in a big company?
Specific to energy storage, there's, it turns out I'm chairing this year the United States Advanced Battery Consortium. That's part of the United States Council for Automotive Research, US CAR. That's joint with the Department of Energy, but involves a whole lot of suppliers. In the case of Chrysler, Ford, and GM, those are the three entities that are part of USABC and US CAR, and they team them with Department of Energy. In each company's case, we don't make the cells. We characterize them and we integrate them. We need to be a smart buyer. We need to know how they work, and we need to be able to do things like, I mentioned a lower cost lithium silicon, lithium sulfur cell. Well, what sort of energy density is that going to have, and what does that mean to the vehicle? What sort of vehicle architectures ought we to contemplate? And then when you integrate them in the short term, you need to have state estimators on board, and that's the marriage of models that describe the systems, in this case the electrochemistry, along with adaptive filters like Kalman filters or methods by which you regress parameters to the models and then operate the devices on board. So the point is, when you're buying such an expensive product, in the Chevy Volt's case, the most expensive single product is the cell purchase, right, of the whole vehicle. Well, you don't want to do that one on your own. So we want to make very transparent all of our goals. We have a website out there, the USABC test procedures and goals and requirements are sort of referenced by everybody in the industry, and that is a public-private partnership. We pay into it, the Department of Energy pays into it, the suppliers pay into it, they're cost-shared contracts typically in order to work with them. Now that's just batteries, it sort of spans the gambit. The automotive industry is so hyper-competitive today, and we buy so much as far as parts of assemblies that come into our plants, the last thing we want to do is chin that on our own.
Right. Suzie, I want to come back to you just as individual researcher. Do you know in drug, molecular engineered systems, drug delivery systems, do you see that U.S. sort of dominance in this as being more diffused? Do you see more people that you're competing against around the world? And if so, how do you kind of partner and deal with those folks?
I would say it's pretty diffuse. Asia is very strong. Yeah. Europe is very strong. If we look at some of the molecular carriers, a lot of the ones that we're working on here are in clinical trials in Asia, in Korea and Japan. So they've really taken a lead on, I think, pushing some of those to clinical trials. We currently, our lab ourselves, we don't partner with international groups right now, but I would say it's very friendly. It's a very friendly environment. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go to my last round of questions, so if there's anybody burning. Yes. Go in the back. No. You haven't asked one yet. So go.
This is a clean tech question. One of the things that strikes me as these electric vehicles and long-range hybrids come out is they're typically in very small volumes. And my guess is the reason is because some of the exotic metals involved are just simply in short supply. And I was wondering, A, if you could comment generally on where those markets are going, and is there anything that molecular engineering can do, sort of like the other gentleman was saying about the carbon cycle, to open up more availability for these battery materials?
Sure, get the cobalt out. In the batteries that we're using today, this generation of lithium-ion batteries, right now there aren't a lot of lithium iron phosphate batteries on the road today, not in any high volume. That could change things in the future. A123 is a leader in that area, and there are other companies as well. But right now the metal oxides that are used contain cobalt. Now it's hard to say what's limiting production volumes. The Chevy Volt is selling on the order of 10,000 to 12,000 vehicles a year. That's not a real small run. That's actually a fairly decent run. That's more or less what the market will bear for that price. This goes back to where I think actually stationary clean tech maybe has an advantage, and then my suspicion is the payback period that customers consider is probably 10 years. In automotive, the payback period is more like 3 to 5 years. And so it becomes very difficult for a customer to say, yeah, I'll make money buying the Volt if I'll hang on to it for 10 years. They just don't think that way. I think that will change probably in the future, and if the price of gas goes up, things could change, quite dramatically.
Yeah, and there was one up here.
You mentioned where the technology and the science is going to be in 10 years. How are you feeling about what our talent pool is going to look like in 10 years? Where you would be talking about kids that are in 6th grade right now, coming online and helping with that endeavor in the next 10 years. Could you address possibly the state of the science education in grammar school and looking forward?
Is that for me? Sorry. Yeah.
Anybody can take that one.
It's definitely a concern for us, and we do actually, for certain positions, being able to have access to visas and get folks from outside the United States is important. We can't always find the people that we need in the sciences locally or even with the U.S. So I can't really speak to what's going on with science education overall, but it is a major concern. I think what you're also going to see is some of the scientists who used to come to the United States, because that's where the good jobs were, don't need to come to the United States anymore. You're seeing a lot more of them staying in their home countries and working on really innovative things there. So it's definitely an issue from our point of view.
Okay, let me go to the last piece, and this is for the non-UW people. So Suzie, you can relax. Hugh, you can relax. What do you want to see from us, right? So what do we have to do in this new institute that's going to affect your lives? I mean, you can read a paper in Science or Nature, and it's not, but what would you expect to see from this which is going to change something in the way in which you do it? Rick, why don't you start?
I would just say from our perspective, we focus on materials, engineered materials for electrodes, et cetera. And that's a very complex, infinite number of solutions to some of those problems. I'd like to see closer communication with the researchers and the folks who are actually commercializing the technologies, because we have a whole list of problems that we're trying to solve. And I know the researchers are working on a whole list of what they perceive as opportunities. I'd love to try to get that communication tighter so we can see where we overlap and maybe help steer each other's visions on where we want to take the technology in the next 5-10 years.
Rick's card, right, Pat? Okay. Just making sure, because,
Yeah.
yes, and we want continuous flow of people through there. We've set as goals things like our facilities, basement facilities, have a third to 40% used by outside users. We want that kind of free flow, so love hearing that. What do you think, Eric?
I think one of the challenges for biotech in general is funding basic discovery research, and I think universities play a very important role. That's not something that we do a lot of. We do a little bit, but we've relied on universities for some of the building blocks of our products. Our lead product, the original antibody, came from University of Miami, and a precursor to the cytotoxic component came from Arizona State. So having relationships to really be able to work with researchers on novel discoveries and take them from the concept stage to, I think public-private partnerships are required, because you've got to do the really novel discovery, which we're not as well equipped to do, but then you've got to develop it, manufacture it, put all the resources and money and expertise, regulatory, into it, which is something that private industry is better at. So making sure you can have that open dialogue, and then also being able to work well with the tech transfer or sponsored research offices to make sure that you can negotiate a deal that makes sense for everybody.
I think industries, especially in the industry I'm in, automotive, it's probably hard to impact our product in the short term. For example, the non-aqueous solvents that are used in lithium-ion batteries were developed in 1959 at UC Berkeley. Lithium-ion batteries didn't come into automotive until about 2008, as far as mainstream, thousands of vehicles per year. So my sense is that it's the people that you want to have in, the communication that goes with that. The other thing I would say, this is more of a very slight short tangent. The NSF goalie grant program is just a wonderful situation, because you get then a lot of money going to the university. In our case, we write into the contracts usually about 10% of a researcher's time in our research lab, and we promise a summer internship for the students that are on it over the duration of the Goalie grant. And it's a low-cost way for industry to get into it. It's great, I think, for the university. So those kinds of tools, I think, are just fantastic.
I think that's a great comment, and I think in the IT areas and software areas we've done, not through formal mechanisms because we haven't had to because of the local environment, had that kind of interplay and exchange, and also loss of our faculty in some cases, which is fine, because it's a continuous exchange. But I think this is a good goal for us here is to have that. Yeah, our main product is our people, right? So it's great to hear. Okay, let's thank our panelists for this session.